There's a feeling that some children know all too well, even from a very young age, the feeling that the rug can be pulled out from under you at any moment, that today's security doesn't guarantee anything about tomorrow, that you need to be on high alert because danger can come from where you least expect it. Carl Jung spent decades studying what happens to children who grow up like this, and he discovered something that should be taught in every psychology class. Children who never feel safe develop a specific psychological blueprint, an architecture that, in adulthood, manifests as narcissistic tendencies. Today, I'm going to explain exactly how this happens, and I need to warn you. If you grew up in an environment where emotional stability was unstable, you will recognize yourself in this video. But first, I need you to understand what emotional security means for a child. Jung described that every human being is born with a fundamental need, the need for a safe haven, a psychological place where the child knows they are loved unconditionally, where they know they can make mistakes without being abandoned, where they know their needs will be met. When this base exists, the child develops what Jung called an integrated self. They can explore the world because they know they have somewhere to return to. They can take risks because they know they will be welcomed if they fail. They can be vulnerable because they know they won't be destroyed for showing weakness. But when this base doesn't exist, something very different happens. The child enters survival mode. They can't relax, they can't trust, they can't surrender because deep down they know that no one will catch them if they fall. And it's in this survival mode that narcissistic tendencies begin to form. Let me tell you about Jake. Jake was 45 years old when he came to therapy. He was successful by all external standards, owned his own company, 2 condos, imported car, but he couldn't maintain relationships. All the women who came into his life ended up leaving with the same complaint. You don't let me in. You're always with your guard up. I never know what you really feel. And Jake didn't understand. He thought he was being a good partner. He gave gifts, he paid bills, he was physically present. Why wasn't that enough? The answer was in his childhood. Jake's father was an alcoholic, not the type who drank every day, the unpredictable type, entire weeks of sobriety, followed by explosions that could last for days, and the worst part was that there was no warning. Jake never knew when his father would turn. Jake's mother dealt with it by pretending nothing was happening. Tomorrow will be better. Your father is just tired. Don't make a drama. And Jake learned that his perceptions were not reliable, that what he saw and felt was not real, that he needed to ignore his own instincts. Jung would call this family gaslighting. When the environment systematically invalidates the child's perception, when the adults say that the danger the child feels doesn't exist, when the child learns that they cannot trust themselves, and the result is devastating. Jake grew up hyper-alert. He learned to read micro-expressions, to detect subtle mood changes, to predict explosions before they happened. These were survival skills, but in adulthood, they became prisons. He couldn't relax around anyone because his nervous system was always expecting danger. He couldn't be vulnerable because vulnerability meant psychological death. He couldn't trust because trusting meant letting his guard down. And how did he deal with it? With control. Jake became a control freak over finances, over schedules, over decisions, because if he controlled everything, nothing could surprise him. If he controlled everything, he was safe. Jung explained that control-based narcissism is a defense against internal chaos. The person cannot tolerate uncertainty because uncertainty means danger. So they try to control the external world to compensate for the lack of internal control. But external control never works because you can't control other people. You can't control the world. And the more you try, the more anxious you become when something escapes. Jake's partners felt this. They felt they had no space to be themselves, that they needed to fit into a mold, that Jake loved the idea of them, not who they really were. And they were right. Jake couldn't love real people. Real people are unpredictable. Real people have their own desires. Real people can disappoint. And disappointment is for Jake, this was unbearable, because disappointment activated that 7-year-old boy who never knew when his father would explode. But wait, because Jake's story is just one manifestation of a much larger pattern. Jung identified 3 types of family environment that create children who never feel safe. And each of them produces a different type of narcissistic tendency. The first type is the chaotic household. This is the environment where the rules change constantly, where what was allowed yesterday is forbidden today, where the child never knows what to expect. It can be a house with alcoholic parents like Jake. It can be a house with parents who fight violently and then pretend nothing happened. It can be a house where the financial situation changes drastically. It can be a house where one of the parents has untreated bipolar disorder. The common denominator is unpredictability. Children who grow up in chaotic households develop what we call anxious narcissism, or an anxious, preoccupied attachment style with narcissistic traits. They are hyper-alert, controlling, incapable of relaxing. They need constant validation, not out of vanity, but out of survival. Because if someone validates them, it means they are doing it right. And doing it right means being safe. But validation is never enough, because the hole they are trying to fill is a hole of security, not of approval. And no amount of praise can give security to someone who has learned that the world is fundamentally dangerous. The second type is the emotionally neglectful environment. This is the environment where the child exists, but isn't seen, where the parents are physically present, but emotionally absent, where no one asks how your day was, where no one notices when the child is sad, where no one celebrates when the child achieves something. It can be workaholic parents who come home too late. It can be depressed parents who don't have the emotional energy for their children. It can be parents who had too many children and can't give individual attention. It can be parents who are so focused on their own problems that the children become invisible. The result is that the child learns that they don't matter, that your needs won't be met, that you're fundamentally alone in the world. Carl Jung called this a primary narcissistic wound. It's when a child doesn't receive the necessary mirroring to develop a healthy sense of self. They look to their parents, seeking a reflection of who they are, and find only an empty mirror. Children who grow up in emotionally neglectful environments develop what we call needy narcissistic traits. They desperately seek attention. They exaggerate emotions to be noticed. They create dramas to exist because in their childhood, only those who made noise were seen. Like Sarah. She was 39 years old, and all of her friendships ended the same way. Her friends would drift away, saying that Sarah was too intense, too demanding, that she needed too much attention. And Sarah didn't understand. She just wanted connection. She just wanted to feel important to someone. Why was that wrong? The answer lay in her childhood. Sarah's mom was a busy woman, 3 jobs, raising 3 kids alone. There was no malice, there was exhaustion, there was survival. But the result for Sarah was the same. She grew up feeling like she didn't exist. And she learned one thing. If you want to be seen, you need to make a lot of noise. So Sarah learned to dramatize, to intensify, to transform small problems into crises. Because crises got attention. Because in her house, only crises were noticed. In adulthood, this pattern repeated. Sarah would meet someone, fall intensely in love, demand total attention. And when the other person couldn't give that attention, Sarah would panic. She'd call 20 times. She'd send desperate messages. She'd make scenes, and people would drift away, not because they didn't like her, but because they couldn't fill a hole that had been dug in childhood, a hole so huge. Jung would say that Sarah was trying to get from others what her parents never gave her. But adult relationships aren't made for that. Adult relationships are between two whole people, not between a whole person and a wounded child trying to complete themselves. The third type of environment is the most subtle and perhaps the most destructive. It's the conditionally secure environment. In this environment, the child feels safe, but only when they meet certain conditions. Only when they get good grades, only when they don't cry, only when they're obedient, only when they don't cause problems. Security exists, but it's conditional, and that's almost worse than having no security at all. Because the child who grows up in total chaos learns that the world is dangerous. They develop defenses against the danger. They know they need to protect themselves. But the child who grows up in conditional security learns something more insidious. They learn that they can be safe, but only if they're perfect. That love exists, but it needs to be earned. That they have worth, but only as long as they produce results. And this creates a specific type of narcissistic trait, performance-based narcissistic traits. These are the people who seem to have it all: success, achievements, recognition. But inside, they live terrified, because if they stop producing, if they stop achieving, if they stop being exceptional, they lose the right to exist. Like Mark, he was 51 years old, CEO of a multinational company, a recognized speaker, author of 2 books. But he couldn't sleep, couldn't relax, couldn't take a vacation without obsessively checking emails. When he stopped, an unbearable anxiety came. A voice that said, "You're not doing anything. You're wasting time. You're going to fall behind. You're going to be irrelevant." And Mark ran after more achievements, more recognition, more validation, but it was never enough, because the hole he was trying to fill wasn't one of accomplishment. It was one of security. In Mark's childhood, his parents were present and loving, but their love was calibrated by Mark's performance. When he did well in school, it was a celebration. When he did poorly, it was silence. There were no shouts. There were no physical punishments. There was something worse. There was emotional withdrawal. And Mark learned that love is conditional, that security is conditional, that he only had value when he was exceptional. Jung called this identification with the persona. Mark merged with the mask of success. He no longer knew who he was beneath the achievements. And when someone tried to get to know the real Mark, there was no real Mark to know. There was just a scared boy wearing an expensive suit. These 3 environments, chaotic, neglectful, conditionally secure, they all produce the same fundamental result: a child who never feels truly safe. And a child who never feels safe can't develop what Jung called the true self. The true self needs space to emerge. It needs security to show itself. It needs nurturing to develop. When this space doesn't exist, the child develops a false self, a mask, a persona. A version of themselves that's acceptable to the environment. And this false self can be very successful. Jake built companies. Sarah was the center of attention. Mark became CEO. But beneath the success, they all carried the same wound. The wound of never having felt safe enough to be who they really were. And here's the most important part that I need to tell you. If you recognized yourself in any of these stories, you're not condemned. The narcissistic traits that developed in your childhood aren't a life sentence. They're an adaptation, a survival strategy. And strategies can be changed. Jung dedicated a large part of his work to what he called individuation. It's the process of becoming who you really are, of recovering the true self that was buried beneath layers of false self, of integrating the parts of yourself that needed to be hidden to survive. And this process starts with one thing: recognition. You need to recognize what happened, not to blame your parents, not to victimize yourself, but to understand, to make sense, to finally name what you felt but never could articulate. Maybe you grew up in a chaotic household, and now you're hyper-alert, controlling, incapable of relaxing. Now you know why. Now you know it's not a character flaw. It's an adaptation to an environment that demanded constant vigilance. Maybe you grew up invisible, and now you seek attention desperately. Intensify emotions, create dramas. Now you know why. Now you know it's not pathological neediness. It's a child who was never seen trying to exist. Maybe you grew up in conditional security, and now you can't stop producing, achieving, proving your worth. Now you know why. Now you know that's not healthy ambition. That's a scared kid trying to make absolutely sure they won't be abandoned. That recognition is the first step. The second step is harder. It's grieving. You need to grieve the childhood you didn't have, the security you deserved but didn't receive, the nurturing that every child needs, but you had to live without. This grief is painful because it means admitting that something was wrong, that your parents, even loving you, failed in something fundamental, that you were deprived of something that was your right. It's easy to skip this step. It's easy to say, my parents did the best they could, and that's true. They probably did. But that doesn't change the fact that you were hurt, and wounds need to be recognized before they can be healed. Carl Jung said that what you don't bring to consciousness appears in your life as fate. As long as you don't acknowledge the wound, it will continue controlling your life, your relationships, your choices, your reactions. The third step is what modern therapists call reparenting. It's the process of giving yourself what your parents couldn't give, of becoming your own safe haven, of developing internally the secure base you didn't have externally. This doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen just by reading a book or watching a video. It usually requires therapy. It requires work. It requires time. But it is possible. Jake, after 2 years of Jungian therapy, achieved something he thought was impossible. He managed to relax. Not completely, not all the time, but in moments, in flashes. He was able to be with his partner without monitoring her every reaction. He managed to sleep without locking all the doors 3 times. He managed to trust, even a little, that not everything was a threat. Emily, after months of inner work, achieved something that changed her life. She managed to be alone without panic. She managed not to call when her anxiety told her to call. She managed to tolerate the uncertainty of not knowing if she was loved every second. And ironically, when she stopped demanding desperate attention, people started giving her attention spontaneously. Mark, after a burnout that forced him to stop, discovered something terrifying and liberating at the same time. He discovered that he existed even when he wasn't producing. That people liked him even when he didn't have accomplishments to show. That he had value just for existing. These 3 didn't heal completely. No one completely heals from such deep wounds. But they found something they didn't have before. They found moments of peace. They found the ability for real connection. They found access to the true self that had been buried. And that's possible for you too. Now I need to pause and speak directly to you. If you've made it this far, you're doing something courageous. You're looking into places that most people prefer to avoid. You're questioning patterns that most people don't even realize they have. This kind of work is rare. It's valuable. It's transformative. And maintaining this space where this work can happen requires resources. The super thanks button down there is your way of saying, this content matters. Keep doing it. Every contribution is an investment in your own journey and in the journey of other people who need to hear these truths. If you can contribute, I thank you genuinely. And if you can't, sharing this video with someone who needs to hear it is already a powerful way to help. Now I need to talk about something that's rarely discussed. What happens when the child who never felt safe becomes a parent? Because here's the painful truth. If you grew up without a secure base, there's a high probability that you're repeating the pattern with your own children, not out of malice, not out of lack of love, but because unconscious patterns repeat automatically. Jake, before therapy, was a controlling father. He monitored his children's every step, demanded detailed reports, didn't tolerate mistakes. He thought he was protecting them. He was transmitting anxiety. Emily, before her inner work, was an unstable emotional environment for her children. She oscillated between over-attention and emotional neglect, between smothering and abandonment. She thought she was loving intensely. She was confusing her children. Mark, before the burnout, was an absent father, always working, always running, always achieving. He thought he was providing. He was reproducing the emotional neglect he himself suffered. Jung said that children don't just inherit genes from their parents, they inherit complexes, unresolved psychological patterns that pass from generation to generation. If you have children, this is an urgent alert. As long as you don't look at your own wounds, you will continue to transmit them. As long as you don't create internal security, you won't be able to create external security for your children. As long as you don't heal yourself, the cycle continues. But the good news is that you don't have to be perfect. Research shows that children don't need perfect parents. They need good enough parents. They're parents who make mistakes but acknowledge them. Parents who hurt but repair. Parents who fail but keep trying. The simple fact that you're watching this video already shows that you're on the path. You're seeking understanding. You're wanting to do things differently. You're willing to look into uncomfortable places. And that's more than many parents manage to do. So what can you do now? First, observe. Observe when you're in survival mode. Observe when you're being on high alert. Observe when your hyper alert kicks in. Observe when you're seeking desperate validation. Observe when you're trying to control the uncontrollable. Just observe. Without judgment. Without immediately trying to change. Just notice. Because observation is the first step of transformation. Second, question. Question whether the danger you feel is real or is an echo of the past. Question whether the person in front of you is really going to abandon you or if you're projecting. Question whether you really need more accomplishments or if that's the voice of the scared kid. Third, seek help. Childhood wounds are deep. Patterns of decades don't change with willpower. Therapy isn't weakness. It's courage. It's an investment. It's the decision to break a cycle that may have spanned generations. Jung said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. You have the chance to change that fate. It's not easy, it's not fast, but it's possible. And the security you didn't have in childhood, you can build now, inside you, and for everyone who comes after you. But before I finish, I need to tell you one more thing about what Jung discovered. He realized that children who never feel secure develop a very specific relationship with fear. For most people, fear is an emotion that pops up in situations of real danger. You see a threat, feel fear, react, and when the threat passes, the fear goes away. But for someone who grew up without a secure attachment figure, that fear doesn't go away. It becomes a constant companion. a background noise that never stops, a tension in the body that never completely relaxes. Carl Jung called this existential anxiety, and it's different from regular anxiety. Regular anxiety is about specific things, exams, job interviews, romantic dates. Existential anxiety is about existence itself. It's the feeling that you don't have the right to be here, that your presence in the world is precarious, that at any moment someone might realize you're a fraud and everything will fall apart. Do you know that feeling? It's the feeling of always waiting for the other shoe to drop, of never being able to celebrate a victory because you're already worried about the next defeat, of never being able to relax in a good moment because you know good moments don't last. This isn't pessimism. This isn't a negative personality. This is the neurological result of an insecure childhood. When a child grows up in an unstable emotional environment, their nervous system develops differently. The amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for detecting threats, becomes hyperactive. Cortisol, the stress hormone, becomes chronically elevated. The body learns that danger is the default state, and even when the real danger passes, even when the person grows up and moves out, even when they build a completely different life, the body continues to react as if the danger is still there. Jung didn't have the neurological vocabulary that we have today, but he described this phenomenon with accuracy. He said that childhood traumas create autonomous complexes, parts of the psyche that operate independently of consciousness, that react before you can think, that hijack your behavior before you can choose. When Jake exploded in anger because of an innocent comment from his wife, it wasn't adult Jake reacting. It was the complex of the terrified little boy that had been activated. When Emily panicked because her boyfriend took too long to respond to a text, it wasn't adult Emily reacting. It was the complex of the invisible little girl that had been activated. When Paul felt like he would die if he didn't achieve one more thing, it wasn't adult Paul reacting. It was the complex of the little boy who learned that stopping meant being abandoned. Understanding this is crucial, because when you understand that your disproportionate reactions come from complexes, not from character flaws, you can start to work with them instead of against them. You can start to notice when the complex is activated, when the reaction is bigger than the situation justifies, when the fear you feel has the texture of something old, not something present. And in that moment of awareness, you gain a space, a small space between the stimulus and the reaction, and it's in that space that healing happens. Jung called this the transcendent function. It's the ability to observe the complex instead of being taken over by it. To say, I know that this is the scared little boy, it's not the current reality. To choose a different response from the automatic reaction. This isn't easy. It's a skill that develops with practice, with therapy, with patient self-observation. But every time you manage to create that space, you are weakening the power of the complex. You are creating new neural pathways. You are literally rebuilding your brain. Research in neuroplasticity confirms what Jung intuited a century ago. The brain can change at any age. Patterns of decades can be altered. The person you became because of an insecure childhood is not the person you need to continue being. But change doesn't come for free. It comes from work, from courage, from a willingness to feel things that you've spent a lifetime trying to avoid. The child who never felt safe developed brilliant strategies for not feeling, for numbing, for controlling. These strategies worked. They kept you alive. They protected you when you had no other resources. But now you have other resources. You're an adult. You can seek help. You can create security in ways that the child you were couldn't. And the irony is that to heal, you need to do exactly what you've spent a lifetime avoiding. You need to feel. You need to lower the defenses. You need to allow yourself to be vulnerable. That sounds terrifying, and it is terrifying. For someone who learned that vulnerability is death, lowering the defenses seems like psychological suicide, but it's exactly the opposite. The defenses that protected you in childhood are imprisoning you in adulthood. The need for control that kept you safe is keeping you alone. The hyper-alert state that saved you is exhausting you. Healing doesn't come from stronger defenses. It comes from finally not needing such strong defenses. From discovering that you can be vulnerable and survive, that you can trust and not be destroyed, that you can relax and the world won't fall apart. That's the journey of individuation that Jung described. It's the journey home, back to the true self that was buried. Back to the child you were before you learned that it wasn't safe to be yourself. That child is still there, waiting, scared, but waiting. And you are the only person who can go get them. The world out there isn't going to give you the security that you didn't have. No partner and no job. No achievement is going to fill that hole. The security needs to be built from within, by you, for you. And when you achieve that, when you finally become your own secure base, something magical happens. You stop needing others so much. And paradoxically, that allows you to have better relationships because you're no longer demanding that others complete you. You're no longer seeking in them what your parents didn't give. You can finally see them as people, not as sources of validation. You stop needing constant achievements, and that allows you to really enjoy what you already have. Because you're no longer running from a void. You're no longer trying to prove that you deserve to exist. You can rest. You can celebrate. You can simply be. You stop living in survival mode, and that allows you to finally live. Not just survive, live. That's the promise of individuation. Not a life without problems, not a magic cure, but the possibility of living differently, of choosing instead of reacting, of being who you really are, instead of who you needed to pretend to be. If you're on this journey, you are not alone. Millions of people around the world are doing this same work, looking into the same shadows, facing the same fears, and every person who heals makes it easier for the next person to heal. Each cycle that's broken is a cycle that won't repeat in the next generation. You are doing something important, something that goes far beyond just yourself. Now tell me in the comments, which of these three environments do you recognize from your childhood? A chaotic household, an emotionally neglectful environment, or a conditionally secure one? And what do you feel now after hearing this? Every person who shares is helping someone else feel less alone. You're validating experiences that have been denied. You're breaking the silence that perpetuates these patterns. According to Carl Jung, bringing these shadows to light is essential for individuation, for becoming your whole self. And if you don't want to share publicly, that's okay. Keep this knowledge to yourself. Use it on your personal journey. The important thing is that now you know. The child you were deserved safety. They didn't get it, and it wasn't their fault. But the adult you are can create that safety now for yourself, and maybe for the first time, feel like the rug isn't going to be pulled out from under you. Keep going.